September the 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day, aimed at raising awareness and removing stigma. And today we're joined by Sam Fewings, who is a suicide prevention advocate, advisor, and policy facilitator. Thanks, Sam, for your time today. Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And it's such a pleasure to be involved in stuff like this. So I work primarily in suicide prevention. And one of the things that I do is I work with people with lived experience, and we help them articulate their story of lived experience to, I guess, assist them in being advocates for themselves and for those with a lived experience of suicide when it comes to policy, when it comes to decision making, whether it be in a government, whether it be something as simple as designing a safe space for people in suicidal distress to come and seek some support. The other aspect, or I guess the other arm of what I do is I work in the community with different people in the community to help them to do two things. One, identify someone who maybe needs some support and someone they can have a conversation with. And then, how do they have that conversation? What does that look like? If they are worried about someone, what do they do? How do they approach it? And then I guess what happens when, worst case scenario, they ask someone if they're thinking of taking their lives and that person says yes, what do you do then? So kind of a dual thing, and really rewarding stuff. Came to it sort of late in life, and I'm very, very fortunate to be one of those people who just absolutely loves what they do. I love what I do, and I don't tell people that I work with. I sometimes can't believe that I get paid to do it. It's one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so important to have work that makes us feel fulfilled. And how did you get into this line of work of support, Sam?
So interesting story. I don't have a clinical background. I don't come from an allied health clinical background. I myself have a lived experience of or living experience of suicide, which, as silly as it sounds, I didn't really work out till I was about 35. What I believed was that everybody felt the way that I felt. Everybody was just better at managing it than I was. And so I kind of went through my life from a very young age up until about 35, thinking that, I just didn't have the skills. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't whatever it was to manage it as well as everybody else did. And so for me, it was kind of a surprise, to be honest with you, that I had this lived experience, that I had this living experience. And so that's how I came to be involved as a lived experience person, and then discovered that, it was one of those moments where I went to a workshop that I now run with a couple of my now colleagues who were running the workshop at the time. And I just remember leaving the workshop and saying to my wife, that's what I want to do now. I don't want to do my corporate job. I was in insurance and that sort of stuff. I don't want to do that anymore. Not quite sure how I'm going to do it, but that's what I want to do. And then, as they say, the stars aligned, and then I started doing it. So yeah, it was a strange journey. It wasn't one that I ever planned on. I didn't, when my guidance counsellor at school said, what do you want to do? I may have, I don't remember. I was in school a long time ago. I know you look at me and think I'm so young and dynamic, but I was in school nearly 30 years ago. I left school. I never said I want to work in suicide advocacy, but here I am, and I couldn't be happier.
Yeah. And what should people know about suicide, particularly if they're concerned about someone close to them?
So there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of misconceptions out there about suicide. And I never judge anybody for that. I think it's really important to remember that because, there is a long history of a stigma associated with suicide. There's still a lot of strong religious beliefs around suicide. There's still a lot of, in many countries, it remains illegal, but for many countries it was illegal for a long time. So firstly, one of my real passions is removing that stigma, realising that there's no shame in suicidality. There's no embarrassment, there's no weakness associated with it. So there's probably a couple of things that I would say. One would be, one of the pieces of work that I do is, as part of that training for people in the community, one of the other aspects of it is how do you engage with someone who's bereaved by suicide? So if you take the statistics in Australia, for example, there's about 3,000 suicides a year in Australia, which is where I'm based. So about 9 a day. And the other data is that there's about 120 people that are affected by each suicide. So that's about 300,000 people a year in Australia alone. So there's a huge amount of people who are affected by suicide every year. And so the question then becomes, what do you do if you know someone who is bereaved by suicide? And that's a question I get asked a lot. And so my message for people who may not necessarily having and I'll talk in a minute about if they're worried about someone, if you know someone who has been touched by suicide, one of the really important things we talk about is this idea of there's a lot of complicated grief. There's a lot of disenfranchised grief that comes with that. And this idea that, they don't quite know how to grieve sometimes because it's a bit of a, to give you an example, I worked with a lady once who returned to work and after losing her husband, and she said to me, I wish I'd told people that my husband had died from cancer because nobody talked to me. I felt so isolated. No one would come up and ask me how I was going. And so if you know someone who's touched by suicide, my strong guidance to you would be reach out and ask them how they're going and just, you'll be surprised. You don't have to do anything magical or amazing. You can't take away the pain. It's not possible. You can't go up and have a magic phrase that makes it all okay. But just asking someone how they're going, not crossing the street when you see them can sometimes be enough, and stopping and just saying, hi, I'm so sorry for what's happened to you. And I just want you to know that I'm here for you. If there's anything I can do, that's enough. That can be enough to really help someone with that grief and with that loss. Alternatively, if they know somebody that they're worried about and they feel like they not want to know more about it, I really encourage them to look for some level of training, and not training in the sense of going and getting a formal qualification. If they're passionate to do that, I say go for it, but you don't have to be an expert to sort of help someone if you're worried about them. It's as simple as just asking them how they're going and saying, look, I'm concerned about you. Can I just check in? And part of it as well, and this is why I really encourage people to get some level of training, and there's lots of courses you can do which can just sort of help give you some skills in this area, but part of it as well is really having the maturity to have that conversation and the courage. It's what I call compassionate curiosity, not coming in with a sense of judgment or I'm going to fix it or I'm going to fix this problem, but really coming in with this idea of saying, I don't know what I can do. I don't know if I can help you, but I'm here with you. And I want to work with you to see if we can get you some help. I'm not here to fix the problem. I'm not here to decide whether you should be upset or not upset. For anyone who's familiar with Brene Brown, she talks about this idea that empathetic statements very rarely start with "at least you didn't." So, she talks about this idea that people who are divorced, well, at least you got married. People who have lost their children, well, at least you can have kids. That doesn't actually add any value. It's coming from a really good place. So this idea of, well, I can see that you're upset about, divorce, but, at least you've got your health. Well, yes, there's nothing wrong with that statement, but it doesn't actually support someone. So it's that compassionate curiosity and saying, look, I'm not here to judge whether you should or shouldn't be upset, or whether losing your pet has brought on a real crisis for you. Whereas, my friend down the road who lost her husband was not as upset as you are. So let me try and compare the two, and say, well, you don't have it as bad as, Betty down the street. Sitting with someone in that space and saying, look, I don't know what I do, if what I can do is going to, I can't help. I'm not here to fix the problem. I'm just here to sit with you. And that can make a huge difference, because it is awkward. And you might get the response of, yeah, I'm fine, what are you talking about? But you've planted a seed, because you never know, down the track, that person might be in a crisis and they'll say, you know what? I know who I can call, because I know that there's someone who is ready to have this conversation. And if you can be that person, and you can change the course of their life by just being someone who listens, that makes an enormous difference. And I'm sometimes asked in this work saying, well, people take their lives and, does it get frustrating? And I'm saying, well, of course not, because you know what? If I do this work for the next 20 years and it saves one person's life, then it's worth it, because it's not a numbers game. It's not about how many people I can save. I don't have a little mark up on the wall. But I've got to tell you, it makes a huge difference to them and their family if I can help them. It makes a massive difference. They're not looking at it going, well, I'm only one person, so it's not that important. It's massively important to them and the people that care about them. So it's as simple as that, really. I'm not oversimplifying it, but you don't have to solve the problem. You don't have to be an expert. But by just having a conversation, you can change the course of someone's life, which is, I don't know if there's anything better that you can do than do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does World Suicide Prevention Day mean to you, Sam?
Look, I think it's really good that we are starting to get a level of awareness, that we are starting to have these conversations. To me, the next iteration, the next step after that is, as we're building the awareness, we also need to start building in this idea of, okay, well, what are we going to do to try and turn the tide? How do we start to make some really solid changes, whether that's systemic changes, whether that's attitude changes? How do we start to build on the momentum that we're getting? So World Suicide Prevention Day is a great way for us to focus in on what we all know is a problem, but it's also an opportunity for us to say, well, okay, let's pause and reflect and say, well, what are we doing? How do we make a difference? You can't look at suicide in isolation. It's got to be linked with conversations around homelessness, domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse, other forms of abuse, other forms of violence. You can't look at them in isolation. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people are talking about now is this idea of, as the cost of living goes up, financial pressures go up, we are seeing an increased level of suicidality because people are feeling like they have no way out. So you can't just say, let's fix suicide. You've actually got to look at the broader spectrum. Well, what other things feed into this? Because there are so many factors. And if we can start to see that in a holistic perspective and through that lens, I think we'll start to see a shift and we'll start to see some change.
Yeah.
Globally, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today,
No, no
Sam.
problems at all. Thank you for the opportunity.
And
And if I can just say, I just say one more thing, Rachel, if that's all right. If someone's watching this and it's brought up something, or it's created some some emotions, I really encourage you to reach out to someone, whether that's a helpline, a help service, a family friend, a doctor, an allied health professional. Don't You don't have to go it alone. I really, whenever I talk about suicide, I want to make sure that we're also putting out there that conversation is really important. So reach out to someone. If this conversation has brought something up for you, please reach out and talk to someone, anyone, to start to get that help. That would be my strongest guidance, for anyone who might be watching this.
thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll add your LinkedIn details to the notes of this interview, Sam, so that people can connect with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.